And I went through executive coaching. I went through life coaching. I went through what they call inspirational coaching and learned this formal process. And there's a term, the only reason I bring that up first is there's a term for you to write down, and it's a term that will never change. It's a principle, it's eternal. And that is this, that you can only lead to the gap. You can only lead to the gap. Hey, and welcome to the CCC weekly webinar. This training is usually for me about what am I confronting every week when I'm working with the doctors. So I'll talk to about 40 doctors a week, see what they're basically struggling with, and then do a webinar on it, just so that there's now a resource that they can use to succeed in a tough area. So this one, obviously, historically, for all of us at some point in our week, our lives, our years, we need help with leadership. And so what is leadership? That's kind of the interesting part of that. Somebody says, I'm having trouble with leadership, or can you teach me about leadership? Or I'm having all these problems with my staff or my family or some team I'm coaching. So help me with leadership. So leadership is a relatively simple term. And I don't know that I could have described this maybe 10 years ago until I went through a lot of training. So 10, 15 years ago, I was managing a company with about 70 employees and kind of doing what I would sum up to be a bad job. And when people at the time would ask me about leadership, I'd get into a lot of the books that are out there that I've read, these commercial books that you pick up at a Barnes and Nobles or on Amazon or something. And that to me was leadership, which was a lot of like inspiration, casting a vision, getting people excited about what we do, holding them accountable and being all over them to do their job. These were the elements of leadership. But then I've decided, I didn't do a great job here with all these people. I had always felt I did pretty well with kind of like 3 to 5, but suddenly it was 70. And that was a lot more challenging. You had to really learn what leadership was. And then, of course, it's not like you're really working with 5 or 70. It's also really one. Is each one person achieving their potential? Are they performing and satisfied with their work and staying with the job and supporting the company and on mission or not? So there's the 5 or the 70, and there's the 1. Eventually, I did a good job managing a company of 154 employees after going through a formal process. So first I went to life coaching school, and I got several coaching certifications through this elite practitioner who was the professor at this particular organization. And I went through executive coaching. I went through life coaching. I went through what they call inspirational coaching and learned this formal process. And there's a term, the only reason I bring that up first is there's a term for you to write down, and it's a term that will never change. It's a principle, it's eternal. And that is this, that you can only lead to the gap. You can only lead to the gap. Of course, in the coaching community, they say you can only coach to the gap. But as I went on and got my master's in industrial and organizational psychology, went on, and now I'm finishing my dissertation to get my PhD in business administration. It's the same thing. You can only lead to the gap. So you're going to walk away from this training with one important principle, and that's how to build a culture of accountability, because that's the only way to lead. There's not another way. A lot of people will come back to this idea of inspiration. In fact, I've been asked hundreds and hundreds of times, how do you inspire your staff? To me, I kind of laugh when I hear that, because it reminds me of how do you get inspired to work out? And I'm still waiting for the day when the alarm goes off at 5 a.m. or 5:30 or 6, whatever me or somebody I know is doing to get themselves up and to the gym. I'm still waiting for the day where any of us go, yes, it's time to work out. And also the same applies to somebody coming into work. So, wherever you are in your life right now in your leadership, assuming for most people watching this, it's because you run a chiropractic clinic. The day when the staff just pops out of bed, fired up and screaming, glory be to God, I got to go to work, that day is probably never coming. They're not excited in the morning when the alarm goes off to do much at all. Now, this may be different if you are at Google and they get free Starbucks and there's free lunch and they get sushi in the afternoons and naps and they get Xbox times that are all segregated out throughout the day. Maybe they're excited to go to work, but for those of us that live in the real world, people are not excited about their job on a regular basis. They might like it, they may be getting a certain level of satisfaction and fulfillment out of it, but there's not this idea of they're motivated, they're inspired. What they need is leadership. And so what I always tell people when they ask me about inspiring my staff, like, well, we huddle every day, every shift, we huddle 15 minutes before that shift. And there's a very specific process that includes some sort of motivational theme along with what we're focusing on to get not just through the shift, but from the shift. We close in a prayer, high five, and we're excited and we go. And so by doing that before every single shift, I do have people, again, I don't know if I want to call it inspired or motivated, but people are very focused going to every shift. That's my job as a leader to have done. We meet every single week for an hour and 15 minutes for a team meeting and a stat meeting. And that also, again, has very specific factors related to going through patient testimonies, education, that we go through all of that at every one of these meetings and get focused on the objectives for the week and the month and the quarter. And so that's leadership. Again, that's how they're inspired and motivated. We're more committed than, again, any of these terms that have to do more with a feeling like, oh, look, I'm all excited. That's a feeling. Feelings are fleeting and they're unreliable. We create commitment through these weekly meetings, through huddling before every single shift. And now we get a staff producing and focused, and I guess we can call it inspired and motivated to be there at my clinic. So now let's get into, again, this more formal process of what's called, and this is another good one to write down, a culture of accountability. Without a culture of accountability, you're just simply not leading. So when I said I'm trying to, over many years, figure out what the definition of leadership is, it comes down to really those 2 points. You can only lead to the gap, and gaps are created through this process of building a culture of accountability. So just talking to a doctor, she just hired a associate, and they have not been meeting. There's no particular objectives. And so what I shared is that, listen, at this point, you're not leading. We've literally removed leadership. So this associate's going to fail, and they're going to blame you, and you're going to blame the associate because you're going to feel like they weren't motivated enough. They weren't inspired enough. They weren't committed to their job, but we're asking for those things without any leadership, which you can't do. You can't ask for those things and not lead. So let's talk through this culture of accountability. It's how you lead your staff, an associate, or anybody within your organization. And that's simply this, that everyone has a role and a goal. People have what's called accountabilities. This is your role. This is your goal. And we talk about those goals and their KPIs. Those are the things that they own. They own the role, they own the KPI, and they own the goal. So when I go into a clinic, let's say you've got a new patient component of the practice, or we're talking about a service line like decompression, or we're looking at visits per week, any particular stat. My question to you will always be, who owns it? Who owns that? And then secondly, how are they being held accountable to it? So let's use this scenario with the associate. So we sat down and said, okay, right now, here's the baseline of new patients. So we're just going to focus on that metric for a moment. So it's 10. So we collaborate. Another important word in leadership is we collaborate. So we collaborate with that associate and say, listen, 10 is a baseline. That's not where it's designed to be. We've put you in charge of new patients. So what do you think is a good number to go up from 10? And so let's say that's 5. Okay, that's a reasonable number. We're not saying it's 50. Let's go from 10 to 15. That's a reasonable number over the next 30 days. So that's going to break down to, a little more than 1 a week. So then it's not just the objective or the target, but then what's the strategy? What are you going to do to get that average of another 1 a week moving forward here? It's not going to happen through just good luck or prayer alone. We're hoping for prayer, blessings, and good luck also, but we're going to have to do something. What's the plan? So then we would commit to a plan. So we now have something that they're being held accountable to. There's a target, it's one extra new a week. There's a plan that they're also being held accountable to. That's the strategy. Then we have to meet. So the leadership is that we've set up the accountability, and then we meet and hold them accountable to it. So at the end of the week, we sit down and say, okay, did you get your one last week? Yes, great. Did it work because of the plan? Did you execute the plan last week? Yes, I did. I executed the plan and got one. Another week goes by, we meet, same time, Wednesday at 10, whatever that meeting time is. So Wednesday at 10, we sit down. Did you get your one? No, I did not. Did you execute the plan? I did. I did exactly what we said we're going to do. I did that screening, or I did that talk, or I asked all the patients for referral. Okay. Again, it's not a win-lose. It's not that somebody failed and must be punished. We're not building this punitive culture where people are lashed for their mistakes. Like, okay, well, we agreed one was certainly reasonable. We also agreed to that plan. In fact, that plan worked last week. So why didn't it work this week? Again, back to leadership and accountability. Did you do the plan? If it didn't work, why not? And then, okay, then how are we refining that plan, adjusting it so that we can succeed this next week? In fact, now we need two. So we got a delta of one now. We're going to hit that 5. We need 2. Again, more leadership. So the idea is we can only lead to the gap. So the gap is we're at 10 new patients. That's the current. And the ideal state, the one we want to be in, is 15, which is 1 a week. So that's the gap. And then we lead in that gap all the way through by having an objective for each week, having a strategy to get there, meeting on it, holding them accountable to it. Again, culture of accountability. And if it didn't work, re-collaborating, refining, adjusting the plan to stay on track. So that's simply leadership. And once again, mixed in with that is the why. Why are we doing this? It's not just about getting a new patient because we said the number was 15, but people are dying out there. People's lives are saved through chiropractic and the work we do in this office. That's where hopefully the motivation, the inspiration, or really a better term, the commitment comes from, is that we're regularly bringing inspiration into the clinic. So my time away from the meetings, the daily huddles, the weekly meetings that we're having, is spent a lot on reading my Bible, praying, reading books, advancing my education, connecting with mentorship, so that I'm bringing what I'm learning to these meetings every week. If you're only watching Netflix and you're not reading and studying and writing things down necessary to educate and inspire your team, we're missing an incredibly important point of leadership. So there's the other component of leadership. Last thing I'll share is we lead by example. And so this is not one, I didn't learn that getting my master's or my PhD, but I have heard top leaders. I actually was listening to a video, and they had 6 of the world's number 1 or all the top leaders of the world for all these different organizations that were, trillion-dollar organizations. And they asked each one of them, what is your key to leadership? And everyone said the same thing. All 6 of them said to lead by example. And so, what does that look like? It's not like you leading some perfect life, but it's certainly the fact that we would invest in the things necessary to bring back to the team. So if my life is not a reflection of what I want to bring back to the team, I'm not leading by example. So I'm able to bring back, you've got a lot of content you have to bring back on a regular basis if you're going to be ready to inspire at every huddle and every meeting. And we're about to do a seminar here in Orlando at my church. So I've spent months and months reading and studying and paying attention and looking at all the things that are working and not working, whether it's in my clinics or the clinics of those that I help coach for or manage, to prepare to lead by example, to prepare to bring good content that's going to inspire, motivate, and commit. And we've got to do the same things in our clinics. So you've got to be ready. When I was first just getting out of school, I went and followed around a lot of the top chiropractors. And the very first guy I went and saw, this guy, Dr. Gandhi, not spelled like the Gandhi. And I went to his office in Ohio, and he was seeing, hundreds and hundreds of people a day. And I got there before he did. So I asked the staff, I'm like, what's he like as a leader? And she said, well, he's always upbeat. I mean, we know that, he has a family and sometimes things aren't going well at home, but you'd never know it. He always comes in and he's always upbeat and he's always ready. And I'm like, what do you mean ready? She goes, well, we meet when he gets here and he'll always have some philosophy, testimony, something funny, something spiritual, have something ready to get us all back on track. And that back on track stuck with me as I land the plane here on leadership, which is that as your staff, as your doctors, as your team comes in, they're always off track because they're coming from their lives. And so, again, they didn't pop out of bed excited to go to work, probably stayed up too late last night. They've got problems at home. We all do. They've gotten a fight with their spouse the night before. One of the kids failed a test. Somebody's supposed to be trying to get into college and still hasn't filled out any of their applications, or they just got a bad grade on the SAT. I didn't read any of this in a book, by the way. This is, I didn't learn this in college. These are all things we all go through. So when the team comes in, they're not on track. So somebody's got to get them back on track. So if you're not ready, like Dr. Gandhi, then you're not going to get the team led into this battlefield of mission we all have as we walk into a shift. I consider each shift to be precious. We call it getting ready for the Super Bowl because the idea is that we're prepping for the most important events of the year every shift. And so I've got to be ready to get my team ready. And we've got to be focused on the gap. What are we trying to accomplish this shift that moves us towards our goals and objectives for each person there and the organization as a whole? Finally, this comes straight from my dissertation that I'm doing for this PhD, is as we evaluate our performance as leaders and look at the team, how much are all of us, every team member, myself, and the patients, those are our constituents. Those are the members. Those are the people that are part of the mission. How much are we all moving towards the objective as we look at every single day and every single shift? Are we all accountable to the overall objective of this clinic? And that really gets into your vision for your clinic. That's why a leader must, yes, also be a visionary. Now, our vision is to transform healthcare in the world, is to save lives in our community, to completely make our clinic the head and not the tail. We're a safe haven for society in this dying, sighing, stressful, drug-induced world. We're something else. We're a safe place, a place of wellness and healing, a place of hope in our four walls. And so we want everybody on mission, going to every shift, patient, staff, doctor, so that we have one big objective: new patients, retention, referral, and reaching this vision of literally changing healthcare for the saving of millions of lives. And that's what God's called us to do. Bless you. Hope you go out there and you are a great leader, because I believe God has made you to be more than a conqueror. You're his mighty warrior. No weapon formed against you shall prosper. So let's go out there. Let's lead the world towards wellness. Bless you. And remember who you are.